Viewer Brian B. asked about tight cam issues and installing cam bearings, and I told him that it sounds like a good time to do a video about that. So let's do it. We've all had tight cam. In reality, I've had as many times the cam won't go in. And every time that happens, you promise that you're going to do a better job next time. And so what can we do to do a better job? You start out, the first time you put in cam bearings, you borrow a tool from whichever one of your buddies has a cam bearing tool, and you knock all the cam bearings out. Everything looks good. You knock the new cam bearings in, and if your luck's good that day, the cam goes in, the cam spins, everybody's happy. But your luck won't last long, and pretty soon you're going to have the next build or the next build or the next build. You're going to have some issues. I thought at first my issue was hitting them too hard and mushrooming them. Of course, I'm doing it like everybody else. I'm putting in all 5 cam bearings, and then you try to stick the cam in, and of course, it won't go in. And you assume you have mushroomed one of them, but your problem is you don't know which one, and you keep sticking it in, and you keep twisting it, trying to mark it, find out, look for a telltale shiny spot where you're twisting it, and then take a bearing knife, and you try to feel them, and sometimes you can, but when you stick in the cam and twist it, then hopefully you can find that. But on a Mopar, you're hitting all 5 at once, and so it's real hard to find which one it is. So probably one of the first things you can do is, instead of that macho way of knocking all 5 of them in, just do the sissy way and do them one at a time. Knock in the rear cam bearing, stick the cam in, test fit. Next one, test fit. This way you know which one is too tight. And then it's easier for you to see on there because it will touch on number 4, because number 5 will go in because you've already tested it. It's fine. So it makes it easier to find it. And then you go to 3, and then you go to 2, and then you go to 1. And then you know where the problem is, which one to use the barrier knife. If you try to do that on all 5 at once, you can easily spend a couple hours trying to get the cam in it. And it's all because you didn't do them one at a time. I know that doesn't sound cool doing them one at a time, but I like it better that way. Another problem I think, I personally, of course, you want the cam bore clean naturally, but I also oil the cam bore and oil the bearing, hoping that will help it slide in easier, and hoping that I'll have less chance of mushrooming. And I don't really think I mushroom them bad anymore. But another problem that I have, and I assume that means everybody does, is a kind of a compound of errors where you might have had one that's not just right, but the cam's bent a whole lot. And I had 6 new cams back there, and I checked them all, and only one of them was straight. Most of them were out around 5,000, some of them way more than that. And which, the bent cam thing is easy to fix, even for a home gamer. It's easy to fix, and I think that was, over the years, I think that was a lot of my problem on cam not going in. But now, the more you do this, the better you're going to get at it. If you have all 5 main bores the proper size, and if you have the cam straight, and if you put the cam bearings in good, guess what? Everything is going to be fine. It's going to work exactly as intended. And the cam's going to spin fine. But when we do the comedy of errors and then they all stack up against you, well, no wonder the cam won't go in. And no wonder why we have tight cam. And I had one guy I know, he told me the fix for a tight cam was to hammer it in and then crank it up and hold it on the floor. He said that'll fix it. And the problem is, I think he may have been serious. Now, I'm not going to get into any of that, but I don't think that's the way we should do it. I think we should take a little more scientific approach, shall we say. But that's some of the things. Straighten your cam. Well, I did a video last month on the cam straightening. You can do it at home. It's super easy. It takes very little special tools. All of the tools you'll already have. And some of them, I've just hit a few licks with the air chisel first time, just one time, and took a cam from 5/1000ths bent down to 1/1000ths. And I don't think you should put one in with more than one, because you can fix that. Even though it's not thought of as something you can do, you can. And I think that's, over the years, I think that's been a problem. I've never checked that for 40 years or more. You know, I just assumed the cam was straight, just like people assume these bores are the proper size. You know, almost nobody checks these bores. But if you check the bores, you can find some problems, and there's not a good fix for those problems. But we're also going to get into that. But here's a couple of blocks I've checked recently. This block was, not this one, but another 230 block. 2, 4, and 5 were perfect, dead on the money. 1 and 3 were 3/4 of 1/1000ths over the high limit. Now, that sounds bad, but I think my plan on that block is, when I put the cam bearings in, if it feels tight going in, then I'm just going to leave it alone. You know, you've almost never heard of a cam bearing spinning in a big block Mopar. So that's my plan. Drive them in. If they feel tight, then I'm going to run it. If they don't feel tight, there's a couple of different products you can glue them with. I think one of them is Loctite. Was it 580 or 680? Anyway, you can glue the cam bearings in, and it's never going to spin then. Assuming, you know, you're only 3/4 of 1/1000 over the high limit. This is what I've used a couple times. Permatex, this is the cleaner, 24163. And this is the glue itself, 64040. But this is $50. I think that Loctite is, a lot less, $10 maybe, and it's probably going to work just as well. But And then we also have the tight cam problem. On another block, it was 188 on number 5, and that's perfect. And then this one was really tight. 2 thou tight, which is a thou and a half tighter than the tight spec. They give you a 1 thou spec on what their bore should be. They're giving themselves 1 thou to play with here, and you still be in tolerance. The next one was a thou and a half tight, which is a thou under the spec, the low spec. And this one was a thou and 3/4 tight. So this was a problem child. Most of them are not as tight as that. And like I said, there's not a good way, but it can be done. I mean, it's very tight, very hard to try to machine a bore like that. You know, if it's out of thou, then you're going to try to take a half a thou off each side. Well, let's be honest, I'm not good enough to do that. It's not going to happen. So the only thing I can do is hone these out. And there's not a good way to hone this, because this is only about 1 inch thick, and the stones you're going to be using are probably going to be a lot longer than that, which is out of the stone spec. You know, stone would rather work within the bore all the time, coming out on each side, not doing this, just working in the middle of the stone. That's totally a bad idea, but that's probably the best thing we can come up with to fix this. But so the basic things, I think, on putting the cam bearings in, assuming the holes are right, is to clean these up with steel wool. You don't want anything in them. And I oil them. I don't know if I'm right or wrong. I oil the bore and I oil the back of the cam bearing. Get them in. If you do them one at a time, you'll know if you have a problem. You'll know it's number 2. And you'll stick the cam in there and you'll turn it and you'll try to get a mark. You'll try to feel it first and see if you can feel where the problem is. And if that doesn't work, then you see if you can find that shiny spot where you turn to the cam. And eventually you'll find it, and then put the next one in and you'll be done. Now this particular block, this is one thing that makes it hard. One micrometer won't cover all 5 holes. The back hole is 188, and this micrometer, and most of them, you know, they work in our range, and it seems like a lot of them start at 2. So you have to have something else to measure the back side. But this one is, what is it? It's a thou and a half tight, which is a thou tighter than the tight spec. So, you know, gonna have to do something about that, because I don't want to have problems. One thing I think, these new cam bearings, I think they're stronger. And of course they say they are. The good Durabonds, the red box, the PDP 17s. But I think that They recommend that for spring pressures 400 and higher, or higher than 400. But I think they're stronger. And I think that they are not as forgiving as the old cheap stuff we used to knock in there 50 years ago. They were, I think they conform better than these newer, stronger ones. I think that makes a difference. Let's look at some of these different cam bearings. By the way, Americans love a thing called instant gratification. And that's what you get when you're doing that cam straightening. You take this cam that's bent and is going to cause you a problem getting it in there, and you work on it a few minutes and it's not bent anymore. It's instant gratification. Everybody loves that. So I'll put a link at the end of this video to it, and maybe I can figure out how to put that in the description too. But anyway, it's fun and you ought to try it. These are the cam bearings, some of them that we have to choose from nowadays. But in reality, most of them all are just a bunch of Durabonds. Durabond makes the one that they sell. Durabond made the Mopar. Durabond makes the Clevites. Durabond makes the red box, the ones that they say to use over 400 pounds of spring pressure. But when you're doing one of these problem blocks, let's say it's too tight, and I think that these strong Durabonds, they're top quality ones, they're double the money of their blue box. But I think that it's stronger and that it causes a problem going in the hole. It's not the cam bearing's fault. The cam bearing is made to work in X size hole. If you go to their website, it'll tell you what size hole this cam bearing is supposed to work in. And if it's a thou or too tight, it's not made to work in that hole. And don't expect it. It's not its fault. I think one of the reasons we used to get away with this years ago is I think the cam bearings were a little flimsier and were more forgiving going in. But if I had a problem block, I would be buying the cheapest stuff I could find, whatever that is. I think these are fairly economical. I'd be buying the cheap stuff and trying to get in that hole and get a good number out of it. The cam bearings work in a pretty wide range of the cam bearing clearances themselves. I think Mopar tells you 1 to 3 clearance and maximum of 5. So they're giving you a range of 4 thousandths there to work with. So, it's not like you're having to work with real tight specs or anything like that. I think what I ought to do is stop this video. We've got the basics covered, and in part 2 I will show more about measuring all the holes and what the best things I can come up with to hone out something when you have a problem like I've got with this one. This might work fine. If I drove some cheap cam bearings in here, that might work fine, but you saw it was a thou and a half tight, a thou tighter than the tight spec. I can't ask these to give me the proper ID after crush if I stick it in a hole that it's not made to go into. But we'll get into that too a little more in part 2.